Hello, my name is Gerald Creel. Today I'll be talking about the psychodynamic approach to leadership and team development, specifically in the 21st century. This is a project for Amberton University in the Human Resources Training and Development Program. Before I begin, I have to ask one question though. What exactly does an iceberg have in common with leadership, team development, and the 21st century? More specifically, what does an iceberg have in common with business and psychology? As we go through this presentation, hopefully each of these questions will be answered. The purpose and intention of this presentation is to directly allow you to understand the psychodynamic approach to leadership on 21st century team development. The hypothesis or the proposal that I am presenting is to understand that the psychodynamic approach to leadership provides a rational foundation in the 21st century for effectively and efficiently understanding subordinates, interactions between people, team dynamics, and oneself as the leader. So what exact goals do I hope to achieve through this presentation? Well, one of the first ones is to realize the value of understanding psychological health for leaders, for subordinates, for team members, for working with colleagues, for organization stability and prosperity as a whole. Furthermore, it's to understand that psychodynamics or psychology in whole is a tool used for allowing leaders to create effective teams and organizations. Hopefully, through this presentation, I hope to demonstrate that the relationship between business and mental and emotional health is quite crucial. I anticipate that this presentation will allow you to understand exactly how valuable mental health and the mental health resources and the psychology involved in all of this is in working with yourself and with the team as a whole. And in understanding that psychodynamics is not an end-all, it is merely a tool used in leadership to help effectively create positive organizations, positive team, and to be able to be an effective leader overall. Though I have previously earned a Master's of Arts in Counseling as well as a Master's of Business Administration, this presentation is for a course in the Masters of Science Human Resource Training and Development program at Amberton University. The reason that the psychodynamic approach to leadership is considered an approach is because there are no specific models or theories associated with it. Furthermore, it is merely an exploration of our consciousness and our unconsciousness. Now, when we say conscious or unconscious, perhaps if it helps in the understanding, use the word awareness or unawareness. So when I say conscious, you can also interpose the word awareness. That which we are unaware of is our unconscious. But this psychodynamic approach is a way of perceiving those conscious and unconscious experiences in particular and being able to process our feelings and our behaviors and the structure that it allows. Furthermore, it gives us meaning to being a leader. It helps us to build and manage an effective 21st century team by understanding ourselves and others. The psychodynamic approach allows us to focus on our insights as well as those of others, both of our own and others' personality characteristics, of the neurosis, and of our unconscious leadership behaviors, as well as the unconscious aspects of someone else. Now, when I say neuroses, I'm talking about something that is subclinical. It's not a loss of touch with reality or something of great concern. It's things such as a mild depression or some anxiety, some obsessive or compulsive behaviors. It's an excessive anxiety or an irrational obsession, but it's something that's not debilitating. Now, when I say unconscious, the unconscious aspect is what we're going to be discussing in our next section. The psychological constructs used for identifying and understanding rationalizations and human behaviors is what psychodynamics is about. Basically, it helps us in analyzing our acts as well as the actions and responses of another person. When we understand that we are a culmination of our early experiences, our most traumatic events, those are the defining pieces of our personality. It's what we are and who we are. When we understand our past and all of the pieces that we bring from that past, then we are more aware of our own anxiety and defense mechanisms. By being aware of our own anxiety and defense mechanisms, we can better realize these anxieties that are created from them. Then we can see the defense mechanisms that we've used as well as that which we are projecting on others. Though psychodynamics is rooted in Freud's psychoanalytic perspectives, where the underlying motivation in life is that of sexual drives, hardly anyone today fully accepts Freud's psychoanalytic perspectives. Rather, today, most follow the theories of those that came after Freud. Hence, they are called neo-Freudians or psychodynamic theorists. With these theorists, a new set of principles and premises were forged. This was accomplished by people such as Adler, Erikson, Jung, Horney, and a few others. For this reason, the psychodynamic perspective is imperative in the 21st century, in that as we move from an industrial age where hierarchical leadership structures prevailed, today we lead in an environment of team building and collaboration, in which we must work effectively as a group to maximize profits, to increase productivity, and to manage performance. Thus, we look at the writings of those who came after Freud, who focused on things such as inferiority complexes or development styles, extroversion factors, or various coping styles, in which we understand a habitual pattern, the automatic routines, or the preconditioned responses that may be subconscious or unconscious, or we may want to even call these non-conscious because we're just unaware of them. So this brings us back to our metaphor of the iceberg. Now, where this metaphor of the iceberg is so prevalent is that, number one, Sigmund Freud did use it, as did many of the other psychoanalysts. That you see above the water, that which is that is visible, that is the overt, that is the stated, that's what's realized, that is our consciousness. Everything below that surface, which is a pretty substantial part, is the bigger portion of that iceberg. That's what's hidden. That is the abstract, that is our subconsciousness. In just the next few slides, we're going to really begin to see exactly how this metaphor of the iceberg plays out in understanding psychodynamics. Now that we've examined what the psychodynamic approach to leadership and team development, specifically in the 21st century, is, let's now turn our attention to how this psychodynamic approach is utilized. We will then move our attention to why we should use this psychodynamic approach. The psychodynamic approach to leadership works by being observant and cognizant of attitudes, of communication styles, of anxiety, of discomfort, of hostility, of disappointments, of various things such as the power relations or the resistance to that power. Furthermore, it's about the spectrum of orderliness all the way to the opposite end of that being disorderly, or meanness with its opposite of kindness, or obstinacy with its opposite of compliance or being amenable to someone. What you have to look at is the full spectrum of people's emotions. Understanding people's attitudes, emotions, and being empathetic to those is the crux of what psychodynamic analysis is about. More specifically, it works by understanding the observation of the interplay between both the conscious and the unconscious. Remember, the unconscious is that we're unaware of, that the behaviors that are unknown or unwanted. It's those behaviors that we've tried to hide away perhaps. And that of the conscious being the behaviors that are present, that are rational, that are observable. It's about evaluating all of this conscious and unconscious interplay, both in ourselves, in others, as well as in the team as a whole. The reason we need to integrate the psychodynamic approach in our leadership ability is so that we can understand others in order to rebuild a team or to build a team initially. It is about team development, but it's a specific insight into human behaviors. And since we are working with people, it's crucial to understand their motives, their rationales, their intentions, as well as our own intentions. So this is where the self-introspection comes in. Furthermore, it's quite imperative that we have the ability not only to communicate a direct command or order, but to understand and to be able to communicate our feelings or our understanding of what other people may be feeling when trying to work as a team. Because in building a team, it's imperative that we understand that we have to interact with a whole host of different and differing personalities and perspectives. As well as in a team environment, we must provide a safety net or a safe place where people can express those feelings, those thoughts, in order to be more creative or to take the risk to step out to do something that is bold in order to make a better plan. Furthermore, it encourages that exploration, which is part of that creativity and the boldness. It's to provide for authenticity and to allow for toleration, to allow the team members to be empowered. The addressing of the psychological issues, this is a little bit of a misnomer in that it's not necessarily that the leader is performing therapy as much as it is understanding the relationship of the people in that team. In order to be an effective team, one must understand the envy, the jealousy, the rivalry, the shame, or the guilt that is associated with each of the team members interacting as a whole. Because in a team environment, being able to understand people's emotions or feelings or their past perspectives or their approach for how they handle a situation allows for a team building community. It allows for people to role model after each other or to have imitative behaviors that could be positive, or we hope that are positive. It allows for people to overcome some of that anxiety and isolation in order to be more forthright and as well as be able to be more creative in their approach. In essence, the psychodynamic approach allows leaders a plethora of information as we move into the 21st century in understanding the psychological knowledge and experiences, as well as the whole host of cognitive and behavioral techniques available to better build a solid team that is productive. One of the great benefits and advantages of the psychodynamic approach is that, unlike a lot of other psychological theories or approaches, the psychodynamic approach allows people to focus on those negative behaviors as much as the positive. It allows for people to focus on the irrational in addition to that which is rational, as well as that which we're aware of, the conscious, as aware of those hidden pieces of us as well as those around us. It's a form that allows us to understand both the good and the bad, to understand the narcissism, to understand why someone personally attacks us, or why we may sometimes have performance anxiety or want to attack another person. Hence, it's imperative that as we progress into the 21st century, that we walk into it with a heightened awareness of our own insights as well as that of other people, that we understand our hidden feelings and emotions and perspectives, as well as trying to understand those of our teammates and those that we lead. We have to be able to work with people that have different emotional perspectives, different approaches to working as a team and to working with us as the leader. When we began this presentation, we began with the metaphor of an iceberg. Let's now move back to this iceberg again as we understand how we integrate this psychodynamic approach to leadership and team development. We're going to look at it from a theoretical perspective, then we're going to look at it from a very practical perspective. Through this, we will be using the iceberg as the basis for most of our understanding. Now remember, with the iceberg, the things that are above the water, that's our conscious, that's our awareness. These are their thoughts and perceptions that we know of. About the water level, just below the surface, that's the subconscious. That's the things we could be aware of. Those are the things that sometimes come up, they surface. You've heard the phrase, it's starting to surface. I'm beginning to get to the edge of things. This is the subconscious. These are our memories. This is the stored knowledge that we have. Further down, that's the unconscious. That's the pieces that we are unaware of. That's our base instincts. Those are our fears, those primal urges, and those violent motives. Those are the pieces of the selfishness that we are not even aware of that's there sometime. In this unconscious is where we're going to begin to see an id and a superego playing out. Now that just below the waterline that we've been calling the subconscious, sometimes you may hear it called the preconscious. But these are the pieces that are ready to surface, to come to fruition, that we can become aware of, that we can make some type of a rational decision on at that point. Now in this unconscious piece of us, there are three factors at play: the ego, the id, and the superego. I'm going to explain these more in just a moment. But the important thing to realize now is that the id is totally unconscious. We're not aware of any of this. Jung called this the personal unconscious, whereas everything outside of this iceberg he called the collective unconscious. This is the difference between Freud and Jung in this regard. But you see on the left-hand side of the graph, the superego. The superego, that's our rationalization piece. That is the piece that makes sense of everything. But you have some of it that's conscious, some of it that's unconscious. Keep in mind that in the unconscious piece of who we are, that's where the more primal aspects of our persona come from. That's where the id is found. Remember that id is the old aggressive limbic piece of who we are. Whereas outside of that, that's the superego. That's the more conscious aspect. That is the piece that is to do with our morals and our values and that which we bring in from society. The conflict occurs in that the ego, the middle piece of this, is trying to make rationalizations or juxtapose both the id and the superego, trying to make sense of everything so that you can function in society as a decent human being. Keep in mind that the id, that's the primitive piece. That's our biological component, that which is inherited. That's what we are born with. In addition to it also being our first learned experiences and most traumatic events. This is the cauldron of our seething excitement and tolerant tension. This is both extremes. One extreme being the absolute desire for creation and conception and bringing on something new. At the other end of that spectrum is the urge for destruction and death and aggression. This is our very base nature. The middle of it, our ego, that's the one trying to make sense of everything from our primal piece with those morals and values that we bring in from society. This is our reality. This is our rationalization. This is what we use to make our judgments and our decisions. Now, let me explain this tripartite psychoanalysis piece of who we are. We have the id on one shoulder, the superego on the other shoulder, and we as the middle, that's the ego. Let me see if I can put this in other words, because quite so often when we look at some of the old psychoanalytic or psychodynamic pieces, it's easy to say, oh, that is of no value to me because I don't adhere to these theories. However, when we look beyond what the specific terminology is that's used and understand the concepts, we can see the value in trying to understand this. So for example, on one side, the id, some people may say, well, this is your primitive, this is the past, this is the unconscious, this is the part that you know nothing of. I'm going to also say this id, this is our past. It is the previous pieces. It's what we try to bring to the table with us that quite often we're not aware of. So when we're setting and negotiating with a customer or with our team members, we have all this old stuff that keeps coming back over and over and over again. We're not quite aware of where this old trash is coming from. Our old ways of behaving goes all the way back to childhood, perhaps. Maybe early experiences. On the other shoulder, this is our superego. Some people say this is the angel. This is the good part. However, I'm going to also say this is our morals, our values. This is our ability to relate to others in society, to be civilized. So on one side, we have our past, previous, selfish desires that are fighting with what we know we have to do that's correct, that's right, that is the best thing to do for ourselves and for others, for the organization as a whole. So this piece in the middle, our ego, this is the piece that Freud and all the other psychodynamic people such as Jung and Adler and Karen Horney and some of these others, they all say, okay, this middle piece, this is where the anxiety comes in. The anxiety occurs because we're trying to bring all of this stuff from the past as well as all of our present with the values that we know have to be there, and that's the battle that's going on. So if we can understand it from an unawareness or something from our past, or the other side, the awareness, something that's present, something that's valuable, and we're battling this. If we look at it from this perspective, this may help us in understanding. Also realize that just because something is in the id's more destructive or aggressive piece, that morbido or the thanatos as it's also called, that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's in this aspect right here that people such as carpenters or some type of a demolition expert or film critics, somebody that's more destructive or trying to tear something about on a symbolic level. Athletes also are in this range. This is what's crucial because this is the piece of the personality that comes out. And the last thing on this page right here is to realize that where a great deal of our anxiety comes from is when the ego, that piece in the middle, our reality, is not able to juxtapose both the id, that primal piece, and the superego, that morality and virtue. It's not able to make the two work together. What then do we do with this unconscious or the preconscious pieces of all of these irrational components, the shameful experiences and our selfish desires, the violent urges, and all these suppressed memories? What do we do with this information? This is where we begin to use defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are the coping tools we use to be able to deal with the subconscious and the unconscious aspects of who we are coming into reality. They are a way for us to overcome the anxieties that's produced from trying to make that juxtaposition between reality and unreality, between rationalization and non-rationalization. In understanding these defense mechanisms within ourselves, it can help us to become a stronger leader. But the more important part in working with teams is that if we understand the way each of our team members is reacting, what type of defense mechanism are they employing, it allows us to understand what their perspective is and where they're coming from for us to understand how better to work with them. For example, if they are focusing on this realm of the narcissistic, I'm in the top category here, and we're looking at the splitting, this is someone who's more focused on themselves, where everything becomes absolutes. There's either total good, total bad. There's no gray area. Everything is in very definitive and absolute terms. This helps us to understand where this person's coming from. Another big area is that of anxiety. This is where you've probably heard a lot of the various pieces, such as displacement, repression, the passive-aggressive or dissociative type behaviors. Basically, what the anxiety cluster relates to is how do we overcome that anxiety that we're facing in trying to make a decision? What is it from our past that's keeping us from making an effective decision that allows us to move forward? With the rationalization, this is where we begin to make excuses for our behaviors. This is the acting out. This is where we have our emotional outbursts and we just lose our temper and just start throwing paper across a room or whatever the case might be. The rationalization, that's where we begin to make excuses for ourselves and for other people. But when we see this in another person, this tunes us into some of the behaviors that we have to deal with as a leader to help build a very effective team. As a leader, the better we understand these defense mechanisms, the better able we're going to be able to work effectively as a team to focus on that conscious and unconscious aspects, the rationalization or irrationalization, or either the incongruence or the congruity of the way people's statements and behaviors align. It is imperative that we also understand that, as in most systems where stress is an underlying feature or that there's an underlying tension in all systems, we have to understand that in working with people, our subordinates or our team members, that anxiety is one of the primary driving forces. And when we can understand where that anxiety is coming from, or the fact that there is anxiety there, then we can be able to better cope with and create a very effective team. From a practical perspective, the tools utilized in psychodynamics allows us to better manage people, manage structures, manage the self, and manage stress. One of the things that has to be realized as well is that not all stress is bad. Stress can be a great source of pleasure, especially if it's linked directly to a goal or to a stated directive. As 21st century leaders, it's necessary for us to understand that we all have an inner dissonance. It's that confusion, that juxtaposition, trying to make sense of a rational world with the irrational that's a part of who we bring to the table. It's necessary for us to understand that others also have this same theme inside of them. The juxtaposition between what's rational and what is irrational, that which is aware, that which is unaware. But it's also very necessary that we realize that we all have those blind spots. And when we understand those blind spots as a leader, in working with teams, we're better able to build a central team that can work together effectively. Psychodynamic approach to leadership is not an end-all, in that there are several criticisms related to the approach. One of the primary is the mythos revolving around the Freudian stereotype. That, as we spoke of in the very beginning of this presentation, with the electrocomplex, the stages of development, the Oedipus complex. A couple of the other big pieces that are criticisms, one is that it's extremely subjective. There are not a lot of absolute studies on psychodynamics because everything is based on interpretations. And probably one of the greater ones is that it's extremely difficult to make absolutes from the unconscious mind or a personality. Because as soon as someone thinks that they've got the absolute answer, then it's going to find a different answer somewhere else. The method that I used in obtaining information for this presentation was based predominantly on peer-reviewed literature in professional journals from 2012 to the present. I then juxtaposed that with information from primary writings from Jung, Adler, Horney, and Freud in particular, as well as a great deal of more modern business approach theorists. I then looked at that through the lens of where my previous experiences in education had been with a master's in counseling as well as a master's in business. Now, one of the biggest problems, one of the greater limitations that I encountered in this presentation of gathering of information was a great paucity of peer-reviewed literature from 2012 to present. There are really very few studies that present absolutes whenever it comes to dealing with psychology and business from a psychodynamics point of view. As I come to the evaluation of all the research that we've put into this, the recommendations and conclusions that I've come up with, I'd also like to say in preface, I certainly hope that the psychodynamic approach to leadership and team development is something that you can use on your daily basis in understanding yourself, in understanding your colleagues, in understanding your teammates, in being able to build an effective team or an effective organization. This is also something you can use in your own home life, your own personal life. Is understanding that we do bring a bunch of stuff from our past. It's understanding that we have our old memories, we have our old reels and the way we go about processing information. All of this from the past. It does come with us, unless we're fully aware of it. Now, on the other side, we understand what we're supposed to do. We understand how we're supposed to treat people. We understand the value of morals and values. We understand that we are supposed to make the right decisions for the organization as a whole, for the team as a whole, as well as for ourselves. Now, we understand that it's the balance act between these two sides that helps us to be an effective leader. Of all the things that we've talked of in this, I certainly hope that you walk away with an understanding that regardless whether you opt to continue to adhere to some of the psychodynamic principles or not is quite irrelevant. The pertinent piece is that you understand there is a psychological component to the way we interact with others, to the way we think of ourselves. And when we as leaders can understand that we are emotional, mental creatures, that our past, our memories, our traumas, our values, when we understand that this influences our decisions, then we will be better leaders. We will be able to effectively lead a 21st century team. As we conclude, let's keep in mind that some of the valuable lessons in the psychodynamic approach to leadership in the 21st century is that it raises awareness of the leader. It allows the leader to understand his or her own personality structures and characteristics, as well as those around the leader, whether it's the subordinates, the team members, or colleagues. It also helps us as leaders to understand the differences and the nuances between people who have to work together to be productive in a team environment. Furthermore, it helps us to understand our past experiences and unconscious behaviors, the feelings that we experience, as well as the personality types that we are going to encounter. It helps us with those daily annoyances, grievances, and conflicts. It helps us to overcome some of the team dynamics where people are not able to work together effectively because of something that they're bringing in from the outside that has nothing to do with the team itself. But more importantly, it provides a serious explanation for a person's intentions, their thoughts, their motives, their problems, and their actions, as well as their problem-solving behaviors. It also helps us to identify some of the personal problems as well as the resources that we bring to the table from our own abilities. It helps us to understand the emotional and mental demands of a stressful job. It allows us an opportunity to reflect on who we are as well as who others are. But furthermore, it helps us to allay or either alleviate some of the problems that we encounter when trying to create an effective team. It also allows us a greater awareness into both the micro, the meso, and the macro behavioral dynamics of groups. that being the micro with the individual, or the meso being the smaller team or a group, as well as the organizational or the macro. It helps us to assert our own authority, to be able to manage effectively with a good conscious perspective as well as a good rational perspective. But lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it helps us to understand ourselves as leaders. In order to be an effective team leader, we have to understand ourselves, our interactions with others, as well as other people. Thank you for participating in this presentation. I anticipate that you've gained something of value from the information that has been presented. If you can understand that in order to be an effective leader, we have to understand the values and the morals, as well as our past and those that we're dealing with, our subordinates, our team members, our colleagues. When we can understand that these are people and not just machines, not automatons, not some type of a cog in the wheel, when we understand that these are people and that we're also human, then we can truly effectuate a very positive change. Thank you for listening.